Okay, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show, episode 108. Trying to think of famous number eights. Obviously, we have Aaron Rodgers sitting on the hospital bed currently. But yeah, a lot of great number eights, of course. A few NFL quarterbacks. I'm thinking Kirk Cousins, guys like that. A fun number certainly to go through. Um, for this Friday episode, I think I'm going to run through the games. I do want to go through some things that we have talked about at Sumer Sports over the past week or so. It's been a really fun NFL week so far. But before I do that, if any of you are interested in football analytics at all, my book, along with Richard Erickson, one of my best friends, Football Analytics with Python and R, is available wherever you get your books. A lot of great reviews so far about people. If you are at all interested in football analytics and want to get a start in a very gentle introductory way, that is the book to do it with. Like I said, Football Analytics with Python and R, Eric Eager and Richard Erickson. A couple blurbs here, by the way, in the back. One by John Park, who runs analytics for the Dallas Cowboys. Another one from John Taormina, who did so at the Atlanta Falcons and at True Media as well. So this is my way of answering that email that I've gotten a million times before, which is, hey, where do I start? Well, start there. It's a great place to start. We already have some cool people in the chat here. Bad Gravity, how is the chat? How's it going, chat? Beat Gamer 99 with us almost every single show. The NFL gambling policy, huge win for the league and the players. And Ryan Nelson, our Lions are for real. Let's briefly talk about last night's game because it's funny. Going into the year, I thought that it was the hype on the Lions was it grew. And granted, like I could be one of the reasons for this. Last year, I was talking about restoring the roar. Win total open 6, close 7, 4-1. I had a lot, back when I was betting before I joined Sumer, I had a 4-1 on the Lions to make the playoffs. That, of course, didn't work. But a lot was won on win totals, alt win totals, and stuff like that for Detroit. They opened up this year with a win total of 9.5. And everybody else in that division, Vikings were at 8.5, Packers and Bears were 7.5. I think it's very clear that the market was overestimating Chicago, big market team with a young, exciting quarterback. They didn't take into account a lot of things. And so Chicago sits at 0-3. Minnesota, look, the Minnesota's the same team they always have been. They're a little weaker roster-wise for sure. Defense is not anywhere close to where they were in the NFC Championship game days of 2017 or 18 or 19, but they're not much worse defensively than they have been over the past 3-4 years. Offense is actually doing very well. Kirk Cousins might set the passing record this year in terms of yards if he were to stay with the team. But they got into 3 one-score games, and by the very nature of it, they have gone 0-3 after winning 11 straight one-score games last year. They've lost 4 straight, including the playoff game last year. So when I looked at Detroit, though, I thought Green Bay was maybe more of an 8.5, 9-win team. I thought Detroit was also more of a 9-win team. So the market was a little bit bullish on them relative to where I was. They go to Kansas City opening night, and I think a lot of sharp people looked at that game and said, look, the offense wasn't actually that good. They got lucky with the pick 6 for Brian Branch, and they snuck out of there with a win. Go to Seattle, they get a little bit banged up. Seattle comes there, they get a little bit banged up. They lose a game in overtime. They probably should have won, frankly, if Goff doesn't throw a pick 6 and Goff hits the deep shot at the end of the game when they were going for a field goal. And if they were to score a touchdown there, they'd be 4-0 right now. Kelsey was also out, as Beat Gamer says, Beat Gamer 99, huge for Detroit in that game. But then, so then a lot of professional money came in on Atlanta last week in Detroit. Detroit was kind of a 4.5-point favorite on the opener. You look ahead, got all the way bet down to about 3, and a lot of professional money on Atlanta. And I understand why. Atlanta's terrific as far as like controlling the game, line of scrimmage, running game. And if Desmond Ridder was able to do a minimal amount of quarterbacking, they could be a good team. He obviously can't because everybody who told us he was good was wrong. But anyway, the Lions had a very, very wire-to-wire professional win last week against Atlanta at home. They go on the road to Green Bay. Now, Green Bay, again, beat the hell out of Chicago in week 1. Kind of controlled the Atlanta game despite being without Bakhtiari, Jones, and Watson. Lost that game at the very end. Then go and then have the kind of exact opposite game at home against New Orleans. They get down 17-0. New Orleans quarterback Derek Carr gets hurt. They come back. They do the go for 2, down 8. They execute it perfectly. Missed field goal by New Orleans. They win. They're 2-1. And so when things got opened up back on Thursday, Detroit was anywhere from a 1 to 1.5 point favorite on the road against Green Bay. A lot of professionals that I knew really liked the Green Bay Packers in that spot, money line, spread. But there was obviously opinions that also like Detroit, respected opinions, because that game closed too after the injuries to Bakhtiari and Jair Alexander meant that they were going to miss the game, and injuries to Taylor Decker meant that he wasn't going. And David Montgomery, who ended up being a very instrumental part last night, didn't miss the game. It ultimately swung in Detroit's favor. And after an early interception by Goff, Detroit basically, controlled it. Goff averaged 0.07 EPA per pass. Contrast that with Jordan Love, negative 0.25 EPA per pass. Some of that was interceptions, some of that was just ineffective play, a lot of sacks. And I think you have to conclude now, after 4 weeks, especially considering how good Kansas City's defense has ended up being, right? Surrendering just 9 points to Jacksonville, just 10 points to the Bears, in addition to just 14 from Detroit, that Detroit's a good, adjust for everything. Detroit's a pretty good ball club. And I think, very much a favorite in that division, very much a team that you have to, I think, consider after, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Dallas, maybe in that order. Maybe Philadelphia hasn't been that impressive relative to expectations, but yeah. So you go San Francisco, Philadelphia, Dallas. I think Detroit and Seattle were always those 4 or 5 teams for me. Seattle hicked up in the first game of the season against the Los Angeles Rams, but have been pretty good since beating Detroit and, of course, beating Carolina. Now, their defense couldn't stop Andy Dalton to save their lives, but at least that was a professional win by them. I'm going to talk about Seattle, I think, later in the show, because I think that game is a little bit mispriced, the market price for Seattle. At least it was back when they were underdogs earlier. So I think you have to consider Detroit the 4th best team in the NFC, and I don't think you are that far off if you think the gap between them, Dallas, and Philadelphia at least, is not that big. San Francisco, to me right now, is a little bit of a distance between everybody else. But I think Detroit is inching in on that second tier in the NFC, which is incredible given where they were. I mean, they got their 3rd win in week 4 this year. It took them all the way until if I'm remembering this correctly, they were 3-6. So that took them all the way to week 10 last year. It took them all the way to week 18 against a Green Bay team that was resting their starters in the second half for Dan Campbell to get his 3rd win in year 1 of that regime. So just a round of applause for how good they are. Some comments in the chat here. Ryan says Goff is not a force multiplier, but he has shown repeatedly if you surround him with very qualitative pieces and create a play call, you can run a high-end offense. I think that's a perfectly said about Goff. I don't think you can win with him if he's surrounded by a bad collection of players, but evidently, I mean, Ben Johnson has done terrific work. And granted, and I'll also say this, and I think a lot of the ball knower film people, who told you Desmond Ridder was good, tell you Goff isn't good. I don't think that they really appreciate how much confidence Goff has when the structure's there. There's something about, of course, you need structure, but I could be in my chair 2 bourbons deep and not be as comfortable as Jared Goff throwing off play action. So I think there's some tangible things, intangible things that Goff does that it makes him a winner. And there's a reason why he's won with both of the franchises he's had, despite his very limitations. Laporta looks promising. Yeah, we talked about this on the Sumer Sports Show Wednesday. The 3 of the top 4 tight ends in the NFL in terms of receiving yards right now are all from Iowa. Laporta seems to be the next big one here. Dan, good bet here. You took money line with Detroit. A very good bet as well. And Mass here says Goff is at his best when the run game is going. Stopping the run is instrumental to stopping the Lions. I agree. Now, Montgomery was very much a singles hitter last night, and it worked. A lot of success rate, 48% success rate on the ground for him. Only averaged less than 4 yards a carry, but a lot of that was because some of the short yardage plays he had were effective, if not, they weren't big yardage plays. a very masterful effort by the Lions. The Packers, look, I'm still high on the Packers. I still think they'll go over the win total. I'm kind of probably out on them winning that division now that they're a game back, with a tie without the tiebreaker. But some of the things, and I've sung the praises of Matt LaFleur on this podcast a lot. And I know Keyshawn Nixon was a Pro Bowler last year, all pro last year, frankly. You can't do what they did on special teams last night and come back and tell me you're trying to win. They dropped about 45 yards on kick returns that they could have simply fair caught. And again, the NFL is just handing you these yards and you're trying to take them. You can't tell me Jordan Love is so bad that you need the threat of a return touchdown in every single return. And frankly, if he is that bad, I want him starting at the 25 and not the 11 after a holding penalty. So I thought that game, again, as much as I like Matt LaFleur, and I think he's done terrific things, I think he does a lot to help Jordan Love win. Last night Detroit was very much the better coach team, and I don't think it was particularly close. The beat gamer is a really good point here. This is, if you go to my week 1 column, I was selling the idea of positionless players. Jahmyr Gibbs is truly a positionless player, so much he doesn't see the field. I mean, look, if there was a way to win positionless football, and I know Kyle Hamilton had 3 sacks the other day, and I know it's easier defensively, even though I don't think Kyle Hamilton's positionless either, because I think if you put him at free safety, I don't know if he's going to be that effective. I think if you put him in the box as anything other than like kind of a slot nickel guy, I think he's good at the slot position where he can cover tight ends and slot receivers and blitz. I don't think he's positionless. I think he's good at one thing, and such. And that's why the Ravens, who are a very smart franchise, have put them there. So that's my recap of the game this week. Obviously, keep it up in the chat. You guys are awesome. Would love more of your opinions. Let's move on to Sunday. I don't want to go through like every game, but let me just talk about some of the games that I think have some compelling interest. The Falcons and Jaguars. I don't know about any of you. I absolutely adore. I love I love the London games. I can't get enough of the London games. I love the 9:30 games. I love being able to wake. And again, some of you guys are Premier League fans or soccer fans, and you're used to this. It's like the same exact thing. But like, I like waking up and just having a standalone game. And back when I was gambling, it'd be like it would set the tone for the whole game. If you won, great. If you didn't, you were reeling. You were trying to catch up, with sometimes is as exhilarating as winning in the first place. But this one, I made the game 3. It is 3. I gave half a point of home field advantage to Jacksonville. Jacksonville, again, this is Trevor Lawrence. A lot of people will talk about Trevor Lawrence in terms of PFF grade, in terms of like the charting that Derek Clausen does. All those things. I'm very sympathetic to the idea that Trevor Lawrence is doing really well and the rest of the team is letting him down. Be that as it may, like I don't know where the cavalry is coming for the Jags. Like they'll get Cam Robinson back, that should help. But their receivers are their receivers. I know Zay Jones is out now, but like Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk should be enough if you're that good of a quarterback. Evan Ingram, of course, as well. Etienne and Bigsby in the backfield. It should be better than that. And then defensively, like they're not getting any better. They're a bad defense. They're going to be a bad defense all season. So I don't really know if there's a way in which we can, do anything other than look at Jacksonville and just say, look, that's going to be a grind for them for sure. So I don't know. I made the game 3. I'm interested to see how Desmond Ridder, frankly, I'm interested in the whole world seeing Desmond Ridder. Again, we were told, and but we were told things before the draft, like if you don't see a lot of potential in Desmond Ridder, you don't know what you're looking for in quarterbacks. And I got to be honest with you, I was selling that idea the whole time, and I think like he's obviously been able to hide behind noon games Central Time for the first 3 weeks. It'll be interesting to see once he's playing now early in the morning. Sorry, what's going to become of him. I actually don't disagree with this from Ryan putting Heineke like. This Falcons team, when you look at strength of schedule, easiest schedule remaining if you look at SumerSports.com, and look at the team page, the league table page. Easiest schedule moving forward. Yeah, you probably have to eventually think of Heinicke if you don't get a viable quarterback play from Ridder, because this team could win 10 games simply by showing up. And if they don't, then you really have to wonder about, that you want that regime. I want that regime to do well. And so I would be happy to see them have success, but I think that they have to change the quarterback. Yeah. Beat Gamer made a really good point, but Desmond Ridder wins in college on a really good team. Pablo Andres says, love the podcast. Thank you, Pablo. I do want to address this. When Desmond Ridder got his shot to play a Power 5 team in a NCAA playoff game, he had 40 dropbacks. 10 of them resulted in either a sack or a ball batted at the line. I just don't think he processes the game fast enough to be an actual NFL quarterback. Let's look at some other games. Vikings Panthers. That game's at -4 now. The Vikings are -4, -114 on Pinnacle. The probably Pinnacle and Circa, the two best sportsbooks in North America. The Vikings were -2.5 on the look ahead. They've taken nothing but money all the way out, and the over has taken money as well. Makes sense. Panthers once had a great defense. Now with all the injuries, it's not going to be such. And even if they were a great defense, the Vikings offense has been phenomenal this season. And that was part of my handicap was this could be a great offense. The defense is going to be a problem. Bryce Young looks like he's going to play, which I do think favors Minnesota relative to Andy Dalton. And if bettors want to lay the points again with Minnesota, I think that they're going to be more sure of themselves. Against Bryce Young, they would be Andy Dalton around this time last year in a Minnesota New Orleans game, again in London, was able to at least cover the number because of a furious stretch of plays. I think they backdoored that, and then the Vikings won with the field goal at the end. But Dalton's been effective. He was effective last week. I think obviously if you're Carolina, you have to play Young because he's your pick. But for the purposes of who's going to win this game, I think it's a little bit better to be playing Andy Dalton. Washington, Philly, this thing has moved out from 7.5 to 8.5 or so. People are betting the Eagles. Eagles off a short rest, but Washington really struggled. Again, one of the things we talked about on Wednesday's version of the Sumer Sports Show was, this sack rate versus, sack avoidance metrics versus accuracy metrics. Sam Howell, terrific accuracy-wise at times in college, has always been a high pressure to sack conversion guy. And we've avoided it the first few weeks, avoided the negatives of it. They were 2-0. They moved the ball okay, especially against Denver. Now we know how much that really means, though, after Denver gave up 70 to Miami. But against Buffalo, it was awful. He took 9 sacks. And there really was no answer to the pressure that Buffalo was putting on them. And that's unfortunate, of course. I think, look at this game. I don't really, have much of an opinion. I don't think it'll be all that much fun. New Orleans now -3.5 against Tampa Bay. This was a flat-ish, not flat, but like a expensive 3 for a while. It looks like Derek Carr is going to at least be questionable to play. I don't think him and Winston are all that much different, especially if Carr is hurt. But I do think Tampa Bay, the 2-0 start has kind of clouded our eyes a little bit on them. They were thoroughly manhandled on Monday by an Eagles team I don't think is at top form right now. So I would favor New Orleans in this game. Bengals at Titans. Bengals laying 2.5, kind of getting out to 3. Bengals weren't impressive Monday night either. I think Burrow, the thing that I said is I think Burrow is a bad injured quarterback. I think he's a lot like Dak Prescott, where when healthy, terrific, makes great decisions, good enough physically to do it. When hurt, guys like Mahomes, guys like Allen, guys like Herbert are just so much more physically gifted. They can overcome those things with their arm strength and things like that. Guys like Burrow, to me, are not necessarily good enough to do that. So that's my worry. Titans are banged up too. And so I don't know if I'll spend much more than what's on Red Zone watching this game. But it's interesting, right? Because both teams are at 1-2. The winner will be back in the thick of the AFC playoff race. The Titans were thoroughly manhandled by Cleveland last week. Chicago getting 3 in Denver. It was 3.5. They have to be. I think this is playing, but the Bears are the first team in NFL history to be 3.5-point home underdogs at any point to a team that gave up 70 points the week before. I mean, this is, I don't know what you do if you're Chicago here. If you can't put up points and keep this game close, people might start asking questions. And again, if you look at the Sumer Sports Show from earlier, the Wednesday before opening day, my basic thing about the Bears was I like Ryan Poles. I think Matt Eberflus is a fine head coach. What I was worried about was their fan base making so much of this season that it was going to get people fired when it was not appropriate to get people fired. And that's what I get worried about. If you start 0-4 in a year like this, in an NFC like this, people will start asking questions. I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen about Sean Payton either, although I think Payton, of course, is far more safe. I don't have a rooting interest in this game, or even at this point, I think Chicago is probably better than being 3-point home underdogs to a Miami team that just gave up 70. But I also have viability issues with the Bears. Let's go to comments here before we get to some other games. Actually, some really good comments here. Mass here. When a bad rushing team meets a bad rush defense, who has the advantage? I think when both are bad, defense has an advantage. Yeah, I think the weak links are stronger on offense. The dependence on weak links are stronger on offense. Meaning, again, like if I have 5 offensive linemen and they're all kind of weak, there's more. I only really need one good defender to exploit that, and so that's my point. I think it's bad to be bad at both, but I think run defense is a little bit more strong link, and hence you can have one player play really well and blow up an offense. Whereas if a right guard is manhandling somebody, you still need the 4 other guys to be viable in order for the offense to be good. Tim Bryan has a good question. I actually don't know the answer to this. Any guesses, theories on what this year's Big Data Bowl topic would be? Back in the day, I used to work with Michael Lopez a little bit, to help them with PFF data. I'm not with PFF anymore, and so I don't even know if PFF's working with them anymore. I know that Mike had a tweet about them firing interns and stuff. So I don't know. I honestly, if you look at the past ones, it was sort of like you had coverage, you had wide receiver routes, you had running backs, you had offensive defensive line. So, you could do a process of elimination and look at what could possibly happen there. Let's look. Who's worse, Zach Wilson or Justin Fields? I think Fields is much better than Wilson. I think that was true the whole time as well. A lot of people are talking in the chat now. This is pretty cool. This is a good question. So, random question: what is the win probability in the decision to defer to take the ball in the second half? Follow up: approximate breakdown of the edge and knowing game state versus edge from seeing opposing team scheme. Yeah, so that's how.d. Tage brought this up in the chat. So the team that gets the ball first covers the first half spread a little around 55%. Now, I actually have to go look back at that data because I'm just taking his word for it, because a lot of really sharp bettors will actually wait till the coin toss, get that information and bet it before the kick. So I don't know if it's I'm not exactly sure. But I do think there is an advantage in the first half to having the ball, which means there's probably an advantage in the second half of having the ball. I'll have to look at that. I think it's minimal at best to defer to the second half, but I think it's the right decision to do so because you do want more information. So it's one of those examples of, like, for example, if you're up 7 after a touchdown, should you go for 2 to raise it up to 9, or should you kick the PAT to make it 8? It's basically break even, but as an analytics person, I would prefer to keep, if I have the ball, I prefer to go up 8, because then there's information hidden from my opponent as they come back. Do they know if that 2-point conversion is going to hit or not when they're done? And that kind of ruins their strategy. Conversely, the whole reason you go for 2 down 8 is so that you have the information about, if I get that second touchdown, go for 2, do I make it? Well, I want to have that information on the first touchdown so that when I'm with 5 seconds left in the game, I'm not all of a sudden needing an onside kick to get 2 points. So I don't. Good question. I'll have to look at the data. I believe it's break even, but teams defer because they want to have the information about how the first half went before they have the ball in the second half. Okay, let's talk about a few more games. Dolphins Bills is just going to be phenomenal, right? I mean, we've all seen this before. Some people have bet the Bills out to 3, and some people have bet the Dolphins back out to 2.5. That's basically been the story of the week. A lot of people are incredulous about the fact that the Dolphins are even underdogs in the first place, which, look, the Dolphins so far this season have played the Chargers, who, they couldn't stop the Chargers really, other than on the last drive. So there were some warts defensively for them. In fact, I thought that New England in week 2 on them, they had a pretty decent success rate. They just couldn't make big plays, and I think that's more of a product of the New England offense being bad than Miami's defense being good. And then last week, Denver did move the ball some on the Dolphins. It was just masked by the fact the Dolphins scored 70 points. I believe one of the safeties is out for Buffalo, so we are going to see Damar Hamlin, I think, this week, which is cool. I tend to think about when, and I know I might piss some people off when I say this, but when every media member who doesn't bet is mad about a point spread, and the point spread doesn't move, right? So when you get, and I'm not going to name names, but when every single media member who's not making models or putting a number on a game is like, how the hell is Miami somehow underdogs in this game? There's probably some wisdom in either A, not betting Miami. I think that's probably the big one. A, not betting Miami. Both people said Jordan Poyer. I was going to say Micah Hyde, so I'm glad that I hedged there. I remember seeing that and I forgot the name. I don't think that's enough, by the way, to beat the VIG. I don't think it's enough to say, okay, all these people are on such and such, let's fade them. No, you have to have a reason. But I do think it's a reason if I like a team and a bunch of people are kind of naively getting to that same conclusion, I will think twice. I will try to go and examine if I'm missing something in a matchup like that. This will be a great matchup. I can't wait to watch it. It'll probably be on my, one of my TVs. Now, interestingly, Cleveland now -2 against Baltimore. This thing was all the way out to 3.5, but now we have the news that Deshaun Watson is questionable with the shoulder. I'm getting info that he's probably out. In which case, I mean, I don't know. Baltimore's got a lot of issues. Stanley, Williams, Humphrey. This is a mash unit, and I think with Lamar, he's going to be moving around a lot on Sunday. And does he stay healthy? Does he get hurt? Who knows? Ryan said, Eric, we would never root for minor injuries to players. We have prop unders on. Never. I agree with that. That's interesting. Okay. Okay. So so somebody said, this is just these are people I just talked to, but their public reports have Watson probably in. Look, the betting market, here's a good question to have for the audience. And maybe I'll pose this here and see what you guys think. Watson, so the number has moved from 3.5 to 2. So you're basically crossing 3 and adding a small probability. So it's moved, let's estimate this 20 or 10%. That the probability that Cleveland will win this game in the markets on this news has moved 10%. Is that too much or too little? Is it too much if Watson's in? Yes, I think so, right? Is it too little if Watson's out? I don't know. I actually think Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Kevin Stefanski, as well as how bad Deshaun Watson has been, means that number's pretty, I actually think that market number is closer to an indication that Watson's out. So somebody said difficult says it was, difficult's here. It was 3, never 3.5. Okay, got it. So never mind. So that's moving it down. Yeah, it's more like than 5 or 6%. So okay, then I think it's still I think it's still probably an indication that it's a toss up. But yeah, some information that I've gotten is not great for Watson. But public reports, as difficult as said, has Watson probably in. So we'll see. never bat 100 on those or 1,000 on those. So cool. All right, let's talk about a different game. Let's talk about Pittsburgh, Houston. Pittsburgh's -3 right now. They did have some travel issues coming out of Las Vegas. I don't think that affects them that much. Houston had a really good performance by the quarterback, CJ Stroud, last week, and that beat Jacksonville. Now they're still hugely banged up. They still have a lot of issues, both offense and defense. Yeah, it just doesn't seem like a game that I'm going to really have a firm opinion on. Like I was very much on the Steelers as people who watched me on the Hammer. I thought that they should have been the team that was the favorite last week. Who knows if I was right? I was just they did win though. And I think Houston was the against many people in Survivor last week, Jacksonville. And so I think that I do think you see somewhat of a letdown from Houston, but you also might see a letdown from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is not a great football team, and the quarterback needs to play better, I think, in order for this thing to turn around and be good. Okay, let's move on to some other games. Rams, Colts. It looks like we're going to get Anthony Richardson. Colts are still a point underdog in that game. I think the shine is a little bit off this Rams team. Stafford looks pretty good, but then he still kind of has those errors that when they won the Super Bowl, he led the league in interceptions tied with Trevor Lawrence. It's fine because they had so many other great players. I think Stafford has to give you, in order for this Rams team to win nowadays, Stafford has to give you all of those great things that he's done his whole career, right? When you look at him, the arm talent is phenomenal, but he can't make those mistakes anymore. And week 1 against Seattle, he didn't make those mistakes. They won comfortably. He kept them in the game for most of the time against San Francisco. Some of those mistakes gave San Francisco the opportunity to win by margin. And then last week against Cincinnati, it got away from Los Angeles because Stafford made some mistakes, but they were in the game in the first place because Stafford is phenomenal. And Difficult has a good statement here. Somebody was relentlessly betting Texans spread last week, and they're doing it again this week. Yeah, that number, by the way, when people look at Jacksonville, that was like 8.5. I think it closed a flat 7. So yeah, there's people betting Houston. And look, like I've said this on this air, and actually, I think if you go to sumersports.com and look at the AFC South preview, the Houston, when healthy, Houston's not a travesty of a roster. Like this, they have some players, and Tank Dell and some of the guys they drafted. Tank Dell is pretty good. Obviously, Dameon Pierce is a running back that is not terrible. So I think that Anderson, secondary without Stingley. Yeah, I mean, if you talk about them at full strength, I don't think it's awful. I think if you look at them when they're injured, that was they're going to struggle. Although they performed incredibly well against Jacksonville last week. Difficult brings up a good point here. Austin Deckless against Watt and Highsmith. Yeah, I mean, that's tough. Highsmith has actually performed really well this year across from Watt. And Watt is obviously continuing not only being a great pressure guy, but a great pressure to sack conversion guy this year. Los Angeles Raiders, Las Vegas Raiders, Los Angeles Chargers. And this is part of my thought process on this game. Chargers are favored by 5.5. 5. Yeah, not 5. It was 5.5 at times earlier. When I think about the Chargers, that to me is like a survivor pick. I don't mind if you're still in survivor. A lot of people got knocked out by Jacksonville last week. My only concern is when I look at, how are you baking in home field advantage, right? Like the Chargers already don't have a ton of home field advantage, and there's a lot of Raiders fans in Los Angeles. Remember, like Ice Cube and all of his friends were Los Angeles Raiders fans back in the 80s and 90s. And Raiders fans, even though the team has left like 3 cities already, they still are pretty loyal. So I think you have to be mindful of what the home field advantage is in that game if you're going to pick them for survivor or something like that. Pick them in your pool. And Ryan says something really interesting. Laying points here with LAC is painful for anybody involved. Absolutely. That's another huge issue. New England, Dallas. A little bit of money on New England. This is depending on where you look. Like Pinnacle, for example, they have New England +7 -124, so that's like a 6.5 basically everywhere else. So I think that I think that people are giving New England a lot of credit. And I'm not exactly sure where it's come from. They hung tight with a Eagles team that I don't think is in great form. They I they've given the Dolphins, at least offensively, the Dolphins' biggest challenge so far. But offensively, they lift a finger in that game and they probably at least cover the number, if not win outright. So that's tough. And then last week, like they did what the Bills should have done that Monday night when Rodgers got hurt. Just get to midfield and punt all but one of your drive, all but 2 or 3 of your drives, and then play great defense. And that's what they did. That's not going to work against Dallas. I think it's also going to work. It's not going to work as much against a Dallas team that's coming off of a loss. And this team, it does things like last week where they lose to Arizona, but they you win 12 games consecutive years. There's a lot of competency there. I think Dak rebounds. I think that they're deeper at receiver than they have been in the past with Cooks and Lamb and guys like that. So I don't know if New England's defense is going to have the kind of success they have against most teams because they're deep there. A good question by Richard Machado. How much is home field advantage crowd noise versus weather and climate? This has been always a tough question. I know Rufus Peabody about 3 years ago when he was talking about on air the Bucks Packers conference title game. He showed the research paper from a few years ago that talked about how the differences in ambient temperature do influence game outcomes. The effect size is not terribly high, but that there is something there. So to the point of Ryan, it's the travel. It's not the travel though, and I think that the reason that Rufus brought this up back all those years, 3 years ago, was in 2020 we saw almost no home field advantage. The book Scorecasting, which I think is back here somewhere, talked about basically referee bias. I think Michael Lopez showed the director of data and analytics, senior director of data analytics for the NFL, showed differentials in pass interference penalties called to which sideline. So there's all these like kind of it's referee bias is what it is, and they showed it I think even a little bit more in baseball than they've been able to in football. And so when you had a lack of crowd noise in 2020, you saw basically a decrease to zero in home field advantage, and it all came from offenses performing better as road teams. So that was the crowd noise type of thing, as well as like a tightening of officiating differences. So that's kind of where it comes from. So there is something to, like, if the crowd is predominantly Raiders fans in that Chargers game, then who knows what's going to happen. Difficult says Bosa surely not healthy. Eckler doubtful. Derwin doubtful. Lindsey out. Yes. I think Jimmy G though being banged up. I don't think Jimmy G's a great injured quarterback, and I don't think that the Raiders. I mean, let's just put it this way: opening day last year, the Raiders were 4.5-point underdogs in the same building. Even with everything being said, I don't think that the Chargers have only gained half a point on the Raiders over the past 13 months. That's kind of how I see it. Not enough for me to like tell everybody that this is a discrepancy that's huge, but it's just that would be the one side I think about in Survivor, because everybody else is gonna, if you're playing Circa Survivor, is playing on Thanksgiving or Christmas that you would want. Bob, Bad Gravity, got to assume that Dallas bounces back this week. Dallas can't play down to competition 2 weeks in a row, right? I mean, a lot of money has been lost thinking that way, but I don't hate it. I think that they bounce back. I think that they got caught off guard last week, and like let's not avoid this. Jonathan Gannon has gotten the Arizona Cardinals to play incredibly hard, and they've had leads in the second half of all 3 games, and I think that that's something to notice. Will it ever translate to things when they have a more stocked roster? Who knows? But I think it's at least an encouraging start for his coaching regime in Arizona and Phoenix here. So Glendale, let's call it what it is. Niners, Cardinals. Niners are 14-point favorites. I don't see much there. Jets, Chiefs. Like, okay, the Taylor Swift thing's gonna be cool. She'll be in MetLife. I actually am going to Minnesota next week. We're just going to do a rebroadcast. I'm going to Minnesota to for a party for my book, Football Analytics with Python and R. I'm going to be going to the Vikings game. I'm going to the Gophers game, Vikings Chiefs game. And it's funny because I figured the Vikings being winless would make, if I wanted to buy my tickets last minute, but the Taylor Swift thing is kind of putting, so I don't know which competing factor is going to win out in that one. But when I think about this game, I think that the Jets have to match up Sauce Gardner on Travis Kelce. I think he's big, physical. Now they have not done this with him. They almost always make him play a side. They almost always make him play a side. So I'm kind of like, I don't know. I'm a little bit nervous about that particular thing, because I think, not that Sauce Gardner can knock Travis out of the, or not that he can like knock him out of the passing game. But even if he makes him like 10% less efficient, can Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Rashee Rice, Kadarius Toney, to a lesser extent, he only played 2 snaps the other day, and Sky Moore play up to the requisite against a pretty good defense and against a good pass rush? Can Jawan Taylor stay on sides? I know that he's been kind of unfairly maligned, but I think this is going to be kind of a slugfest. I think if you lay 8.5 with the Chiefs, you very well may win. But it's going to be, I think it's going to be a grind. I think it's going to be much more like the Jacksonville 17-9 game than it is about the Bears 41-10 game. I think the Jets defense is pretty good and has a lot of pride, and I think the Chiefs offense is still figuring things out. So that's going to be an interesting game. I can't wait to watch it. I can't wait to see the Vikings and the Chiefs play in that beautiful stadium in Minneapolis the following week. Okay, this is the last one, and I have a little bit of an opinion on this one. This one was weird because Seattle against New York. Seattle was opened look ahead was like 1.5 point favorites. And then it reopened at the Giants being like 1.5 point favorites and the Seattle being an underdog. And when I was kind of looking at this and prepping for some shows this week, the Seahawks are banged up, right? Abraham Lucas, Charles Cross, always a little something with Tyler Lockett, just kind of week to week stuff. But obviously Jamal Adams has not been fit enough to play. Tariq Woolen out. They're going to get Woolen back, it looks like, from the public reports, which is interesting. And then I look at the Giants and they're pretty good on the defensive front. Defense, they're starting the young guys in the back end. Linebackers, I'm not like crazy. I think Bobby Okereke is like an okay player. Certainly signed a good contract. But then the other part is Saquon Barkley's like, if he's going to play, he's not healthy. And we've seen Saquon Barkley play when not healthy. Everybody was, confusing him with Devontae Booker 2 years ago. So when I look at this Giants team, I like what I saw from Jalen Wyatt at times against the Cardinals. I think Daniel Jones is tough as hell. They're also without, either Evan Neal is out or has been out, but he also hasn't been good when he's been playing. And I know it's hard to go on the road, West Coast to East Coast. There was an angle for a long time, West Coast, East Coast for early primetime games. A lot of that stuff's been accounted for now. I think I like Seattle in this one. Seattle starting 3-1 after losing to the Rams in an auspicious fashion in week 1 would certainly be a nice come up for them and a good one for Geno Smith as he's on year 1 of his new contract. So this has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed this. The only thing I'll ask before I go is smash the like button, smash the subscribe button. We're almost up to 2,500 subscribers on YouTube. We're almost up to 10,000 followers on Sumer Sports, at Sumer Sports on Twitter. I'd love to get to 10,000 followers by the end. My guys, Sean Syed, Tage Seth, Parker Fleming, doing fantastic work getting you guys all the stats and the data. Sumersports.com, my Friday article where I go through one thing I'm buying, one thing I'm selling, and some trends I'm monitoring this week. I'm selling the idea of the tush push being that big of a deal. That's what I'm looking at. But yeah, it just help us grow the show. Hopefully you guys like the content. and we'll continue to bring it to you in the way only Sumer can. Really appreciate all of you for coming. Richard Mach, thank you. Like you for doing all this. Thank you for doing all this. Like and subscribe. Parker is so great. Elite mind in the space. Absolutely, I agree with that. He's a pleasure to work with every single day. Oh, good point. So Mass asked, why did Sumer Sports take down those preview graphics retweeted earlier today? There was an error in one of the columns. So I think if you go to Sumer Sports and actually look at the I can actually just bring this up here. If you go to Sumer Sports for the preview article, let me present that real quick here. If you go to sumersports.com and you go to the weekend preview for week 4, it'll have those back updated here for all the games. There was a small error we had one column that was run defense when it was supposed to be pass defense, and so we had them flipped. So we just eliminated them from Twitter. But thank you for pointing that out, Mass. We'll have it corrected. Bad Gravity, liking the book, Eric. Thank you. And Brandon Brooks, surprisingly high watch score for Giants Seattle. Subscribe to the newsletter. Yes, thank you. We have over 1,000 subscribers to the newsletter now. We're really pumped about that. Yeah, I think the thing with the Giants and the Seattle is neither team is that bad. So if both teams are decent, that helps. The spread being close to 0 helps, and the total is not small. The total is in the mid 40s up there. Good question here from Ryan. I actually gave us a talk at University of Minnesota last year to their data science math department. Got to meet a lot of people in the football. PJ Fleck fan are annoyed. I mean, look, the Gophers are better than when I was a kid and growing up in Minnesota. So I'm he's much better than like Tim Brewster. He's much better than some of these other guys I've had. The way he manages the clock is not great, and yet I think in the Big Ten he can hide that a little bit because the games are all low scoring. But there are games where, like the Northwestern game, where they mismanage the time so badly that they end up losing a game they should win. So I think Fleck on average is positive. I think he recruits well. I think he's grown the stature of that program. I think in game he should hire one of you and have him standing next to you and be able to tell him sort of how to handle the clock situation in college football. They had a 21-point lead in Northwestern. Not only did they lose, but they lost a 3-touchdown lead to them. So cool. Like I said, sumersports.com, subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to all of our great content. It would not be possible for me to do the show, for anybody to do what they do without loyal listeners and without loyal followers like you. So I appreciate you greatly. So for Eric Eager, this has been episode 108 of the Sumer Sports Show.